The mahogany conference table in room 404 was cold, matching the expression on Roger Caldwell's face. He pushed a single sheet of paper across the polished wood, his thumb leaving a faint smudge on the header. "This is it, Victor," Roger said, his voice flat, devoid of the false warmth he usually reserved for board members. "We're restructuring. Your position is redundant, effective immediately. And before you start about your severance package, save your breath. Julian here has reviewed the files. You're getting 2 weeks' pay and that's it." His nephew Julian smirked from the adjacent chair, spinning an expensive silver pen between his fingers. I looked down at the paper, then back up at the two men who had spent the last 3 years trying to dismantle my work. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam my hands on the table. I simply slid my security badge across the mahogany and said, "Understood." 15 years earlier, in the sweltering summer of 2011, Omni Freight Logistics was a chaotic mid-tier trucking outfit operating out of a cramped, exhaust fume-choked warehouse near the Newark ports. We had 70 trucks, a whiteboard covered in smeared dry erase marker coordinates, and a server room that was literally an old janitor's closet with a single box fan blowing dust onto a stack of rattling Dell PowerEdge towers. I was 33 then, hired as the sole systems architect. My job was simple, yet impossible. Keep the legacy dispatch system from crashing, while the dispatchers manually calculated routes for 70 drivers across the eastern seaboard. For the first 5 years, I lived on cold coffee and stale vending machine sandwiches. The dispatchers were drowning. A single traffic jam on the I-95 could cascade into 3 days of delayed shipments, costing us thousands in client penalties. That was when I realized manual routing was a relic. I spent my nights and weekends writing a piece of software that would eventually become the nervous system of the company. RouteFlow X. RouteFlow X wasn't just a basic GPS tracker. It was a proprietary routing database middleware written in Python, utilizing a PostgreSQL backend. It pulled live API feeds from weather databases, state transit authorities, port congestion logs, and fuel price indices. It translated that raw data into optimized shipping lanes, automatically updating the manifest files for our entire fleet. By 2015, the software had reduced our fuel overhead by 22% and cut delivery delays by 85%. Our fleet grew from 70 trucks to over 1,000. Because I had built RouteFlow X independently during my off hours using my personal hardware, I held the patent. In 2016, when the founder of OmniFreight, a decent, old-school logistics man named Arthur, who actually respected his staff, wanted to integrate it permanently, we sat down with legal. Clara Mendez, our senior corporate counsel at the time, drafted the intellectual property and licensing agreement. Since I was a loyal employee and Arthur had treated me well, I leased RouteFlow X to OmniFreight for a nominal licensing fee of exactly $1 per year. But Clara was a meticulous lawyer. She knew that founders don't stay forever. Under Section 7A of the agreement, she inserted a critical clause. The license was contingent on my active employment with the company. If my employment was terminated for any reason, or if the company defaulted on the annual $1 payment, the software license would automatically terminate exactly 48 hours after my departure. In addition, my employment contract contained Clause 9C, a double multiplier severance clause. If OmniFreight terminated me without cause, they owed me 18 months of my base salary, multiplied by 2. At my current salary of $18,500 a month, that meant a payout of $666,000. For years, that agreement sat undisturbed in a locked filing cabinet and a secure digital archive. But then Arthur retired, and in 2022, the board hired Roger Caldwell as the new chief executive officer. Roger was a corporate hatchet man, a slick MBA, who viewed logistics not as a service of trucks and drivers, but as a spreadsheet of numbers to be squeezed. A year later, Roger brought in his nephew, Julian Caldwell, as the vice president of operations. Julian was 30 years old, wore tailored suits that cost more than my monthly mortgage, and possessed a toxic combination of supreme confidence and complete technical ignorance. Julian's mission was clear: trim the fat to make OmniFreight look highly profitable for an upcoming acquisition by Vanguard Holdings, a massive logistic conglomerate. Roger wanted a $250 million buyout, and his personal bonus was tied to hitting a specific profit margin by the end of the third quarter of 2026. To Julian, my salary of $222,000 a year was a glaring target. I was the highest paid non-executive at the company. Every quarterly review, Julian would sit across from me, tapping his tablet, complaining about the IT budget. "Why are we paying you this much, Victor?" Julian asked during a meeting in early 2025. "Our routing software runs on autopilot. We have a team of junior developers in Bucharest who can maintain this system for a quarter of what you cost. You're just sitting here watching a dashboard doff. The dashboard runs because the back-end architecture is balanced." I told him, keeping my voice level. Rootflow X requires constant database optimization. The Bucharest team handles front-end tickets. They don't know the query logic, and they don't have access to the core database keys. If Rootflow X goes down, the trucks stop. Julian laughed, a dismissive nasal sound. "It's software, Victor. Code is code. We own the servers, which means we own the system. You guys in IT always try to make yourself sound indispensable." I looked at Clara Mendez, who was sitting at the corner of the table. She caught my eye and gave a nearly imperceptible shake of her head. She had already been sidelined by Roger, who preferred using an external corporate law firm that didn't ask questions about compliance shortcuts. Clara knew the storm was coming. What Roger and Julian didn't realize was that they were playing chess with a grandmaster, while they couldn't even set up the board. They assumed Rootflow X was company property because it ran on their local servers. They had never read the 2016 IP agreement. They didn't even know it existed. And I wasn't about to tell them. The tension within the office escalated in early 2026. Julian began bringing in outside consultants from a firm called Novus Tech, giving them unrestricted access to the dispatch room. It was clear what they were doing. They were trying to reverse engineer Rootflow X, or at least find a way to run it without me. Every morning, I would find one of these consultants sitting at a terminal, running basic diagnostic queries and asking my junior developers detailed questions about the database schemas. One afternoon, a young Novus consultant named Tyler came to my office. He was holding a printout of the PostgreSQL database connection pool config. "Victor, we need the master root credentials for the database servers. We're planning to migrate the database to a shared cloud instance next month to cut hosting costs." I leaned back in my chair. "Who authorized this migration?" "Julian Caldwell did," Tyler replied, shifting his weight. "We're setting up the new pipeline. We just need the SSH keys and the master password." "I can't do that," I said, my voice calm but firm. "The database contains proprietary routing algorithms and active client data. Under our security compliance framework, master credentials cannot be shared with external third-party contractors without a formal sign-off from the board of directors and a signed NDG agreement. Send me the formal board resolution, and I'll provision a restricted read-only account for your team." Tyler left, looking flustered. 10 minutes later, my office door swung open. Julian walked in, his face flushed with anger. He didn't bother closing the door. "What is your problem, Victor?" Julian demanded, leaning over my desk. "Novus Tech is here on my orders. You don't block my contractors. Hand over the credential." "I'm protecting the company's data assets, Julian," I replied. "If Novus migrates that database to an unsecured public cloud without proper container configuration, we risk exposing our clients' proprietary freight logs. Furthermore, the Rootflow X engine runs on a specific bare metal server cluster because of the low-latency disk operations required. It will crash on a standard virtualized cloud instance. I need a board-approved security waiver before I release the keys." "This is insubordination," Julian hissed. "You're blocking progress because you're terrified of becoming irrelevant. We don't need your permission. We're running this company now." "I'm following the protocols written in the employee handbook, which were approved by the board," I said. "If you want to bypass them, get Roger to sign a formal executive override." Julian glared at me, then spun on his heel and walked out. I knew what he was going to do. He was going to use this as ammunition. I also knew that Clara Mendez had been fired 2 weeks prior. Roger had replaced her with a compliance lawyer from a firm that did whatever the CEO wanted. Clara had called me the night she was let go. She hadn't been upset. She had been calculating. Victor, they paid me 6 months of severance to walk away quietly. Clara had told me over the phone, but they made a massive mistake. They didn't have me sign a non-compete, and they didn't review my old filing cabinets. I have a digital copy of the 2016 IP lease for Rootflow X. I also have your employment contract with the Clause 9C multiplier. If they fire you, do not sign anything. Call me immediately. Are they really going to try it? I had asked. Roger is desperate, Clara said. The Vanguard Holdings due diligence team is coming in 2 weeks. They want to see a lean, fully automated operation. Roger needs you gone so he can show a lower payroll run rate. He thinks he can just keep running your software for free. 2 weeks later, the call came. July 17, 2026, at 4:30 p.m. My phone rang. It was Roger's assistant asking me to come up to room 404. I walked in to find Roger and Julian waiting. The atmosphere was thick with engineered hostility. Roger pushed the termination paper across the desk. This is it, Victor. We're restructuring. Your position is redundant. Effective immediately, Roger said. This is a termination without cause, I said, looking at the document, which means Clause 9C of my contract applies. That is 18 months of my base salary, doubled, totaling $666,000, payable within 10 business days. Julian scoffed. You wish, Victor, we're terminating you for cause. Insubordination. You refuse to hand over critical database credentials to our authorized technology partners, Novus Tech. You actively blocked a corporate migration project. We have the emails from Novus documenting your refusal. You're not getting a dime of that double multiplier. The security protocol requires board authorization, I said calmly. I was following compliance. We are the compliance, Roger said, leaning forward. We have the board's backing. Now, we can do this the hard way, or you can sign this release form. We'll give you 2 weeks of pay, and we won't fight your unemployment claim. If you don't sign, we'll sue you for tortious interference and blocking corporate operations. They thought they had me cornered. They thought a 50-year-old engineer would panic at the prospect of losing his income and sign their predatory release just to avoid a legal battle. They didn't realize that I had spent 15 years building the very walls of this castle, and I knew exactly which brick to pull to make the whole structures collapse. I stood up, leaving the release form untouched on the table. I picked up my security badge and slid it across the mahogany. Understood, I said. Julian smirked, thinking he had won. Have a nice life, Victor. Make sure you clear out your desk by 5. We've already disabled your email access. No need, I said. My desk is already clear. I'll have my attorney contact you regarding the severance. I walked out of the conference room, down the glass corridor, and into the elevator. As the doors slid shut, I looked at my watch. It was 4:45 p.m. The clock was ticking. They had exactly 48 hours before the proprietary license for Rootflow X expired. I met Clara Mendez at a quiet Italian restaurant 3 blocks from my house. The table was tucked away in a corner, illuminated by a low-hanging amber lamp. Clara was already waiting, a thick leather folder resting beside her glass of red wine. As I sat down, she slid a document across the white tablecloth. It was a copy of the 2016 Intellectual Property and Licensing Agreement, signed by me and Arthur, the former CEO. It's exactly as I remembered, Clara said, taking a sip of wine. Section 7A is ironclad. The moment you are no longer an employee, the license for Rootflow X terminates in 48 hours. Since they fired you today, Friday, at 4:30 p.m., the license legally expires on Sunday at 4:30 p.m. At that point, any continued use of the software by OmniFreight constitutes willful copyright infringement and patent violation under Title 17 of the United States Code, Section 501. And what about the for-cause claim they're using to block my severance? I asked. Clara smiled, a cold, sharp expression. It's laughable. You followed the company's internal security protocols. You have a documented email thread requesting board approval for Novus Tech's access, which Julian ignored. Under the Delaware General Corporation Law, officers cannot claim insubordination when an employee is enforcing compliance guidelines designed to protect corporate assets. We're going to file a demand for arbitration on Monday morning. They owe you the $666,000 plus interest and my legal fees. But that's just the legal side. How does the system actually stop? I leaned forward, explaining the technical reality. Routeflow X doesn't run on a simple switch that I can flip. If I logged into their network and shut it down, they could sue me for hacking under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. I'm not doing that. The software has a built-in cryptographic licensing handshake. It's standard enterprise security. Every 30 days, the Routeflow X engine on their servers sends an automated HTTPS request to a private licensing verification server hosted on my personal domain. My home server validates the cryptographic token and sends back a signed lease file. If the lease file isn't updated, the system's routing tables automatically lock, defaulting to a read-only state. The automated dispatch engine will stop processing new manifests. And when is the next handshake due? Clara asked. Sunday night at midnight, I replied. Even if they try to bypass the licensing check, they can't. The database tables are encrypted with a key that is generated dynamically from the handshake response. If they try to force run the code without the validation server, the system will corrupt its own routing tables. I don't have to touch a single server at OmniFreight. I just have to turn off the validation service on my home computer. Perfect, Clara said, opening her folder to reveal a draft of a letter. I've already prepared the formal notice of license termination. I'm sending it to Roger, Julian, and the entire board of directors on Sunday at 4:31 p.m., exactly 1 minute after the license expires. I'm also copying Vanguard Holdings' lead acquisition counsel. They're in the middle of due diligence for the buyout. When they see a multi-million-dollar copyright infringement claim and a complete operational shutdown, they'll put the acquisition on ice. On Saturday morning, I sat in my home study, looking at the terminal on my screen. The validation script was running quietly, receiving periodic check-ins from the OmniFreight servers. I opened the configuration file for my licensing server, changed the validation status of the OmniFreight client token to revoked, and restarted the service. That was it. I didn't break into their network. I didn't steal any data. I simply stopped providing a service that I owned, which they had refused to pay for. Later that afternoon, I called Keith Holloway. Keith was the senior operations director, a man who had started as a driver 20 years ago and knew the fleet inside out. He had been complaining for months about Julian's new routing policies, which forced drivers to work longer hours for less pay. Victor, Keith said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. I heard they let you go. The dispatch room is already a mess. Julian's Bucharest developers tried to run a database update this morning to change the driver's scheduling matrix. The system rejected it. They don't know what they're doing. They're trying to bypass the Routeflow X security protocols. Keith, I said, tell me, what's the dispatch volume looking like for Monday? It's the biggest run of the quarter. Keith sighed. We have 1,200 trucks scheduled to depart between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. We're hauling cargo for major retail accounts, Walmart, Target, and Home Depot. If those trucks don't move, the delay penalties under Clause 14B of our client contracts kick in. It's $250,000 per day for every major hub that doesn't receive its shipment on time. If the system goes down, we're looking at millions in losses by Monday afternoon. Then I suggest you get some rest this weekend, Keith, I said quietly. Monday morning is going to be a very long day for Julian. What did you do, Victor? Keith asked, a sudden note of realization in his voice. I didn't do anything, I replied. I just took my property with me when I left. The storm broke at exactly midnight on Sunday. On my home monitor, I watched the server log. A connection request came in from the OmniFreight dispatch IP address, seeking the monthly cryptographic handshake token. The server responded with the programmed 403 forbidden status, accompanied by the revoked license flag. Within milliseconds, the Routeflow X engine on OmniFreight's local servers initiated its safety protocol. The system converted the active routing databases to read-only, locked the transit optimization algorithms, and stopped generating new manifests at 3:30 a.m. on Monday. The first shift of dispatchers arrived at the Newark hub. Usually, they would spend the first 30 minutes printing the automated route sheets and driver manifest slips. But this morning, the dispatch terminal screen showed a flashing red prompt. Critical system error. Routeflow X license handshake failed. Core database locked. By 4:15 a.m., the terminal yard was in absolute chaos. Over 200 trucks were idling in the Newark yard, their headlights cutting through the pre-dawn mist. The line of semi-trucks backed up out of the facility gates, onto the access road, and eventually onto the shoulder of the interstate. Similar gridlocks were forming at our hubs in Atlanta, Chicago, and Dallas. Drivers were leaning on their horns demanding their route sheets. Without the automated routes, they didn't know which trailers to hook up or which highways were clear of weight restrictions. Julian, who had been asleep at his penthouse apartment, was awoken by a frantic call from the Newark yard manager. He rushed to the office in a panic, calling the junior developers in Bucharest. "Just bypass the security module." Julian screamed into his phone as he paced the dispatch floor. "Write a script to force the database to open. We need those route sheets now." The Bucharest developers tried. For 2 hours, they attempted to inject a bypass script to force the PostgreSQL tables to unlock, but they didn't understand the cryptographic handshake design. The system was built with a zero-trust architecture. When the bypass script attempted to force write permissions on the encrypted routing tables without the signed lease token, the Routeflow X self-protection mechanism triggered. It purged the temporary cache tables and shut down the database engine entirely. The system was no longer just locked, it was dead. By 6 a.m., the first wave of shipping deadlines was missed. Under Clause 14b of the client agreements, the financial penalties began accumulating. $250,000 per day, per regional hub. With 4 major hubs paralyzed, OmniFreight was losing $1 million every 24 hours. And that was just the direct penalties. The retail clients, Walmart, Target, and Home Depot, were already calling Roger Caldwell's office, threatening to terminate their logistics contracts entirely for breach of service. At 7:30 a.m., my personal phone began to ring. The caller ID showed Julian Caldwell's cell number. I didn't answer. I sat at my kitchen table, sipping my coffee, watching the morning news. The phone rang again, then a third time. I let it go to voicemail. By 8:30 a.m., I had received 15 missed calls from Julian and 5 from Roger's assistant. A text message from Julian read, "Victor, call me immediately. The system is down. We need you to log in and fix it. This is an emergency." At 9:00 a.m., Clara Mendez sent the official notice of license termination to Roger, Julian, and the board. 10 minutes later, she forwarded a copy of the notice directly to the legal department at Vanguard Holdings. The reaction was instantaneous. Vanguard's due diligence team, realizing that the software running OmniFreight's entire logistics network was not corporate property, but leased patent tech that had just been revoked, immediately notified Roger that the $250 million acquisition was suspended indefinitely. My phone rang again. This time, it was Roger Caldwell himself. I waited for the third ring, then picked it up. "Victor," Roger barked, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and terror. "What did you do to the system? The entire company is shut down. We have 1,200 trucks blocked, and Vanguard is threatening to pull out of the buyout. You hacked our servers." "I didn't hack anything, Roger," I replied, keeping my voice cool. "I'm sitting at my kitchen table. Your servers are completely untouched by me." "Don't lie to me," Roger screamed. "You locked the database. We have the Bucharest team looking at the logs. They say it's looking for a key from your domain. You turn it back on right now, or I'll have the FBI at your door for corporate sabotage." "If your developers are looking at the logs, then they've probably told you that the Routeflow X software license has expired," I said. Under Section 7A of the 2016 IP agreement, the license terminated 48 hours after you fired me on Friday. Continued execution of that software without a valid license is a violation of federal copyright law. I simply ceased providing validation tokens to an unlicensed user. If you run that software again, you're willfully infringing on my patent. Roger gasped, a choking sound. The 2016 agreement? What are you talking about?" "The agreement Clara Mendez drafted, which you never read when you decided to restructure the IT department," I said. "If you want to resolve this, I suggest you call your lawyers. Clara and I will be at her office at 11 a.m. If you're not there with a signed settlement, the system stays dark and Vanguard walks away." I hung up before he could reply. I looked at the clock. It was 9:15 a.m. OmniFreight had already lost over $400,000 in penalties, and their $250 million buyout was crumbling. They had exactly 1 hour and 45 minutes to get their checkbook ready. The conference room at Clara Mendez's office was quiet. The large window looked out over the city skyline, where the morning sun was casting long shadows across the streets. Clara sat at the head of the table, her laptop open, beside a stack of printed legal agreements. I sat to her right, a glass of water in front of me. At precisely 11 a.m., the door opened. Roger Caldwell and Julian Caldwell walked in, flanked by a senior partner from their external corporate law firm. Roger looked 10 years older than he had on Friday. His tie was slightly askew, his face pale, and he had dark circles under his eyes. Julian, for once, was completely silent, his arrogant posture gone, staring at the floor as he sat down. Their attorney, a sharp-faced man named Donald, opened his briefcase. "Let's get straight to the point. We are here to resolve the operational issue immediately. Every minute our trucks are idle is costing us reputation and contract penalties. We need the system unlocked." "We can do that," Clara said, her voice steady and professional. "But first, we need to address the terms of the settlement. There will be no negotiation. The terms are fixed, and they are non-negotiable." Donald frowned. Victor was terminated for insubordination. We are prepared to offer his standard 2-week severance if he unlocks the database. Clara laughed. A brief, dry sound. "Donald, let's not waste each other's time. We have already filed a demand for arbitration regarding the for-cause termination. We have documented proof that Victor was following the board-approved security compliance manual. If you proceed with the arbitration, you will lose, and you will be forced to pay the full double multiplier severance under Clause 9C. But that is the least of your concerns. Right now, OmniFreight is operating my client's proprietary software, Routeflow X, without a license. That is a direct violation of Title 17, Section 501. The license expired at 4:30 p.m. yesterday. We own the software," Julian muttered, his voice cracking slightly. "We paid his salary while he worked on it." "No, you leased the software," Clara corrected, sliding a copy of the 2016 IP agreement across the table. Under Section 7A, which was signed by the founder of this company, the license is contingent on Victor's active employment. The patent and copyright belong entirely to Victor. He leased it to OmniFreight for $1 a year. Now that he is no longer an employee, you have no legal right to run that code. Donald reviewed the document, his eyes scanning the signature lines and the termination clause. He leaned over and whispered to Roger, whose face grew even paler. "What are your terms?" Donald asked, looking back up at Clara. Clara read from her screen. "First, OmniFreight will pay the full Clause 9C severance package of $666,000. Second, since Victor has no intention of leasing his intellectual property to this management team again, OmniFreight must buy the Routeflow X patent and source code outright. The purchase price is $4,200,000. Third, a mutual release of all claims, ensuring Victor is free from any liability regarding the system shutdown. Fourth, Julian Caldwell will be stripped of all operational authority over the logistics systems immediately." $4,200,000? Roger gasped, slamming his hand on the table. "That's extortion. We'll sue you for damages." "You can try," Clara said calmly. "But by the time your lawsuit reaches a preliminary hearing, the quarterly retail shipping windows will have closed. You will have defaulted on your contracts with Walmart and Target, costing you tens of millions in direct penalties. More importantly, Vanguard Holdings will have officially terminated the acquisition. We sent a copy of the license expiration notice to Vanguard's counsel this morning. I believe their legal team is calling your office right now." As if on cue, Roger's cell phone began to vibrate on the table. The screen showed the name of Vanguard's managing partner. Roger stared at the phone, his hand trembling. He didn't answer it. Instead, Donald took his own phone, which was also vibrating, and stepped out of the room. 2 minutes later, Donald returned. He looked at Roger and gave a slow, solemn nod. "Vanguard's counsel has stated that if the intellectual property dispute and the operational shutdown are not resolved by noon, they will formally terminate the acquisition agreement. They are citing a material adverse effect under Section 5 of the buyout contract." Roger looked as if he was going to faint. the $250 million buyout, the culmination of his 4 years as CEO, his massive bonus, his entire corporate legacy. It was all slipping away because he had tried to save $200,000 by firing his systems architect. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Victor, please. We've worked together for years. You can't do this to the company." "You didn't think about the company when you tried to cheat me out of my severance, Roger," I said. My voice quiet but resolute. "You wanted to make your spreadsheet look lean for Vanguard, and you didn't care about the 15 years I spent keeping this place running. You let Julian treat the engineering department like a line item to be discarded. This isn't personal. It's just the cost of doing business." Roger slumped back in his chair. He looked at Donald. "Sign it. Just sign the agreements." The legal documents were executed within 15 minutes. Clara's bank details were provided, and Roger authorized the immediate wire transfers from OmniFreight's operating account. We sat in silence for another 20 minutes until Clara's laptop chimed, confirming the receipt of 2 separate wire transfers, one for $666,000 and another for $4,200,000. A total of $4,866,000. I opened my laptop, connected to my home licensing validation server, and updated the status of the OmniFreight client token to active, with a temporary 90-day expiration window to allow for the transition of ownership. I ran the restart script. 10 seconds later, Julian's phone buzzed with a message from the Newark yard. The database had unlocked. The automated dispatch routing tables were regenerating, and the truck engines were starting up. The gridlock was finally beginning to clear. 3 weeks later, Vanguard Holdings completed the acquisition of OmniFreight Logistics. However, during the final negotiations, Vanguard reduced the buyout price by $20 million, citing the operational vulnerability exposed during the shutdown and the unexpected cost of the patent acquisition. Following the buyout, Vanguard's new board of directors immediately fired Roger Caldwell and Julian Caldwell for gross negligence and breach of fiduciary duty. Roger's stock options were voided, and Julian was blacklisted from the logistics industry. As for me, I retired from corporate life at 48 years old. I purchased a house on the coast, far away from server rooms and mahogany tables. I started a boutique database security consulting firm, working only when I wanted to, for clients who actually understood that the code running their business was worth more than the paper they printed their budgets on. Clara Mendez was retained by the new Vanguard subsidiary as their lead outside corporate counsel. Occasionally, we meet at that same Italian restaurant, raise a glass of red wine, and toast to the value of a well-written contract.